Hi. Hi, everybody came in. It's such a nice day, and you came here. That's so nice. Yeah, thank you. Well, this is the third of 3 programs on Common Ground. And so the exhibit is coming down in August. If you haven't seen the exhibit, it's up in the gallery over there. It also means that's when storytelling, when stories, or we stop collecting stories. But what was wonderful is I'm here chatting with you all, or some of you, the sound of the room. And if you've been in the gallery, it sounds just like that, because we hung speakers that are kind of directional speakers, and as you're walking from one place to another, you hear different stories. And that's kind of what the room sounded like just now, because, you know, it's kind of cool. So I am Michael Lapides. I am the Director of Digital Engagement here at the museum, and I'm also the co-curator of this exhibit, which was conceived 5 years ago by former curator Akia DeBarris Gomes. And it's great to see it come to this kind of program. Probably most of you know this is an oral history project. What it means to be a resident, what it means to live in this place, and that's what this is all about. As I said, it's been 5 years we've been doing these, and you've been telling these stories, and you've told us stories about what the place means to you, what you know it means to live here, your family histories, and your hopes, your dreams. I mean, it's been incredible. There are over 200 stories now in the archive. Which is really fantastic. I should say that the project made possible by a generous grant from the William M. Wood Foundation and additional support from Mass Humanities and also from individual supporters, so we're very grateful for that. Yeah, so partnerships, there have been plenty. SouthCoast Artist Index, you might have heard of. In fact, the first of these programs was about arts and culture. And they've collected a lot of stories from artists and musicians. 20 Miles Squared, Our Lady of the Assumption, the New Bedford Free Public Library is partner, Joseph Abood Manufacturing, the Unitarian Universalist Society of Fairhaven, the Westport Library, the restaurant Hung Mees, the South Coast LGBTQ+ Network, Bethel AME Church, Coastline Elderly, the Community Economic Development Center, and Grace Church. Yeah. So as I said, we'll continue story collection through August. And so please, in this remaining time, if you haven't told a story and you have one to tell, come tell it. And there are 4 ways to share a story. One is you find someone like me or Emily Reinl or Naomi Slip who work at the museum, and we can record it with you. You can go straight to the website and do it there. We have a booth up in the gallery. You can do it there. And the 4th way is, as I was mentioning, some of the partners through our traveling booth. And the booth is right now at Grace Church, and we'll be there. It will head to Union Baptist Church on July 7th. One last thing to mention is, in every story that's collected is collected as part of the museum collection. It's archived, and as we, we hold it just like we would hold a great painting. So we are going to, these will be in the archive and accessible through the website or through the library for as long as we're here. And so today, we are very fortunate to have a group who will talk about their stories around activism. The panelists today are Andy Pollock, Bruce Rose, and Liz DeCarlo, thank you, and Bev Bocelli, thanks. It's hard to read my phone. So I'm really looking forward to hearing you all, and the format will be that 5 or plus or minus minutes each person will have, and then we'll all gather up here and take questions from you all and have a chance to converse. So, Andy, you want to take a lead? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Andy Pollack. I'm the president of the LGBT network in the SouthCoast, and I want to read the story that I told for the Common Ground project. So, if I can do this, it'd be even better. Sorry, did you get that? Just clip it in there. There we go. All right, and I'm tall, so I'm going to have to do this. All right, here we go. I came in for lunch after cutting wood in the back field of our farm one snowy February day 17 years ago. My husband looked upset and said there'd been a flurry of phone calls that morning. He told me there'd been an attack at one of the local gay bars in New Bedford the night before. I was stunned. The previous night, a young New Bedford man entered Puzzle's lounge, ordered a drink, and casually asked the bartender if this was a gay bar. When answered in the affirmative, the young man took out a hatchet, a machete, and a gun. He then proceeded to attack the unlucky patrons. Because those in the bar fought back, no one was killed, but 3 people were seriously injured. The assailant escaped into the night. I was co-chair of the SouthCoast Marriage Equality Coalition along with Liz Carlo. We immediately started to organize a vigil since we were the only LGBT organization in the community that had an established database. Liz, her wife Bev, my husband Jeff, and I organized the event within a few hours. When we arrived at the bar that night, the crowd was buzzing. Police and national media were everywhere. The vibe in the community was anger, fear, and shock. How could this have happened here? To be clear, it was never completely safe. There were instances of violence against unfortunate individuals, yells of faggot from passing cars as you entered Puzzles. But this time it was attempted murder, and it could have been much worse. The air was electric on that cold, wet night I led the vigil. There was a sense of incredulity, danger, and urgency. No one knew where the perpetrator had gone. Was he still in New Bedford? I remember Mayor Scott Lang coming into the bar afterwards to speak to a frightened, angry, shocked crowd. Mayor Lang spoke to our community and assured us he had our back. He assured us he would work to solve this heinous crime and that he was an ally. He was brave, adamant, and resolved. Everyone was thankful for his courage. And as he got ready to depart, I remember a young man slipping off a bar stool, dropping a quarter in the jukebox, and Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive" lyrically accompanied the mayor as he left the bar. A few days later, Mayor Lang asked all the churches in the area to tone down the anti-gay rhetoric. We were in the middle of the marriage equality fight, and people had strong feelings. Some churches did what was asked, others did not. One prominent pastor explained to me that people in his congregation told him we had gotten what we deserved. Mayor Lang understood that words and attitudes have consequences. He understood that when a minority is treated in a way that is less than a majority, for instance, Jews aren't allowed in a club, or African Americans can't drink from a water fountain, the words give permission for violence. I would like to say that the violence has stopped and the language has improved since the attack 17 years ago, but things have gotten worse. There's increasing violence directed against LGBTQ+ network from right-wing paramilitary groups, actual Nazis, and white supremacists in the SouthCoast. LGBTQ books are being banned and challenged in local schools. Violence targeting the LGBT community is on the rise, yet we remain undeterred. We will challenge the hatred wherever it is found with constructive and affirmative nonviolence. We will endure, we will thrive, and yes, we will survive. Let me finish by reading the SouthCoast LGBTQ+ network official response to the current rash of violence. It states, incursions on LGBTQ+ safe spaces have been escalating in the SouthCoast, with hate mongers intimidating people in person and harassing our community on social media more frequently and aggressively than ever before. In response to these increasing threats, the SouthCoast LGBTQ+ network will continue to work diligently and proactively with local government, law enforcement, and community partners to mitigate any threats against safety of the people that we serve. We will not engage with bigots and homophobes. We will not look for ways to return violence and insults in equal or greater measure. That's not who we are. Instead, we will look for ways to de-escalate tense situations in partnership with community experts and professionals, with the belief that a positive, peaceful approach to conflict resolution will lead to a better outcome for us all. The South Coast LGBT community will continue to focus on our mission, which is to develop a thriving LGBTQ+ community on the South Coast, where members can freely, safely, and joyously celebrate their true lives and realize their full potential. Thank you. I got so carried away. I'd like to introduce Bruce Rose for the next speaker.
Hello, everybody. As I understood the purpose of the Common Ground Stories series was to try to bring together a diverse array of lived experiences in the New Bedford community. This is my story, not the whole story, nor the only story, but it's the one story I've chosen to tell you to help you understand how my worldview got shaped and how I became who I am as a result of the lived experience in New Bedford. You know, usually when people are called upon to reflect on their experiences in New Bedford, there's a tendency to talk about the pleasant moments, the nostalgic memories, and the good old times. And that's okay, but unfortunately, sometimes this is done at the expense of sharing the real painful and less than glorious stories in our experience. I grew up a black Cape Verdean kid in the Bay Village of New Bedford, public housing project. And along with my mother, who was divorced, and my two younger brothers, we lived in the high-rent district of the Bay Village. That's the southernmost end, bordered by Holland Street and Grinnell Street. Now, if you know anything about the projects, you know there ain't no such thing as a high-rent district. Besides the village, my favorite playgrounds, I guess, were the park wall at Monty Park, the wharf, Hazelwood Park, Hazelwood Beach, which is now people refer to as West Beach, and of course, assorted street corners. Now, when you're young, growing up, most of the influences on you are your family, your friends, school, and maybe your church. School, I think, is the most impactful because of the amount of time that you spend there as a member of a captive audience. And schools oftentimes can send strong messages about who you are, what your worth is, and what you can aspire to. For me, those messages were really important. And so I think about the time when I was 16 and I decided to quit high school. It was part of a strategy for some other purposes, which I won't go into right now. But anyway, I always understood at the time that there was an unwritten policy at New Bedford High School, and that was that if you quit school and you decided later on that that wasn't the wise thing to do, they'd let you come back to school. And so my plan was to quit in December. I'd only miss a couple of weeks of school, come back in January. And when I did, I had to meet with the assistant principal, who really didn't like me. And so I told him that I realized that I shouldn't have quit school. I want to come back to school. And he said to me, we don't want you back. So I had to concoct a plan B to finish my high school diploma. So I ended up enrolling in the New Bedford High School Evening Extension Program. And when I finished, I went to Bristol Community College and UMass Amherst, where I got my bachelor's, my master's, and my doctorate. But that jolting experience of the New Bedford High School caused me to think about other kinds of assaults on my personhood that I had endured in my lived experience in New Bedford. And I thought about things like the time when a priest, a revered Catholic priest at a predominantly white church in the city, chased me and my friends out of a church bazaar because we were causing some mischief. And as he was chasing us out, he told us, "Get your black asses out of here." So, whoa. And then I also thought about when I learned what it meant when people called me boy. And I remember thinking about when I learned that I would not be allowed to go into the Warm Sutter Club because of the color of my skin. And oh, don't let me get started on the numerous encounters with heavy racial undertones with the New Bedford police. Now, I didn't often get called nigger, but that's how I was often treated. And so I learned, because the messages were strong, that I was undesirable and I was not worthy to a significant sector of the social environment in which I lived. But later, school influenced me again when I learned about racism and classism, thankfully through 3 distinguished professors at Bristol Community College, the late Professor Rachel Holland, Dan Gilbarg, and Tanya Nicolette. From my experience and I should also say from my very good friend, Carl Cruz, who helped me to see what I could not. And it was those experiences, I think, that helped me to better articulate for myself the experiences that I had endured. And so I think about all of these things having an impact on how I saw the world and how I thought the world saw me. And as I began to shape my perspective and refine my stance on anti-racism and being a social justice advocate, because I deeply detested the discrimination, the economic inequality, the oppression, and the exclusion that was heaped upon me and others of my social circumstances. So from that moment, I decided that I was going to try to make the world a better place. And so for the last 50 years of my life, I've been engaged in the cause of racial and social and economic justice. Now, just as ours is a very, very imperfect nation, so too is New Bedford. With all its flaws, imperfections, ugly stains, dirty secrets. But this is my New Bedford, and this is my story. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Liz DiCarlo.
A lot shorter. I don't think I'm going to talk about what I was going to talk about. I think it's very important to put into context what it meant to be a privileged white woman growing up in Newton, Massachusetts, in an upwardly mobile Italian immigrant family, where privilege wasn't really talked about, but you knew you had it because you were in school. And even though you were the only Christian in your class because you got tracked by your mathematical and scientific ability, it was an opportunity to learn, to go to a good college, to become a nurse, to get your graduate degree in public health, and to really understand what it was like not to have privilege by engaging with people who either were living in North Carolina and telling me that I was the first white friend they ever had, and Carlos was 65 years old, and then being able to come to New Bedford, to choose to come to New Bedford because of its multiracial and multi-ethnic people, as well as being able to use my skills as a nurse and be able to use my skills as an organizer. When I was a high school student, they were talking about the need for affordable housing in Newton. And nobody in my family was really supportive of that, except my mother and I, because we knew what conditions people in our neighborhood were living in who didn't actually have running water and who could use community development funds appropriately for housing, to improve housing no matter where they lived. So what we learned was that people used the statistics of the community and then used the money the way they wanted to. So that was like my first lesson in high school of seeing how people use people, basically, and they use them for different reasons. So I think when I saw my mother organizing all the little old lady Italians in our neighborhood to do different things for us, for our kids, whatever, they really helped us see what organizing meant and how when you bring people together around a common perspective or a common cause or a common need, then you can really empower one another and do something to change the conditions. So we did get affordable housing in our neighborhood, and some of our neighbors did get their houses fixed. And then we carried on as we went to look at the appropriate use of community development funds in North Carolina. And then it just went on and on. And as a person who really had a terrible reaction to people being hurt because of racism or sexism, I didn't understand the homophobia stuff too much until I was able to understand that as a bisexual woman, I really needed to be able to express who I am and love who I love. So that was an important transition for me. At the same time, an intellectual understanding of how you create social change. Some of it happens through a countercultural kind of opportunity, you know, the hippies and yippies of my era, as well as the Occupy movement of years ago, not too long ago. But then when you look at the professional technical track that a lot of us took to think that, you know, with the right information, people will make the right decisions. Well, It's not quite that simple. So you use your professional technical skills to then be able to organize on a political level. And for me, that meant not just, being the campaign manager or co-campaign manager for the first person of color to be elected to the city council in New Bedford, Viola Pena, but to also look at what was going on in our community around the way drug addicts are treated. HIV and AIDS became a twin epidemic with substance abuse in our community, and we needed to organize around that. So whatever the issue, you can use your professional technical skills to organize politically to make a difference in the community and to educate folks. And then to use your common ideology to then move toward what you need in the community around drug treatment programs, the continuum of drug treatment programs, as well as how you treat people with HIV and AIDS, as well as substance abuse. So as we then came out more, my wife and I got married 20 years ago in Toronto when it was the first city in the Western Hemisphere to be able to become married. It was, of course, we need to go to Toronto. So our friends drove us to Toronto. We got married. But that was 2003. And coming back to New Bedford, working with the Alliance of Gays, Lesbians, and Supporters, and then being able to really work together with the community around many different issues. You need to really listen to people. You really have to listen to what people think the issues are and how they think the issues can be resolved. And we did that a lot as we did the grassroots community organizing around women's issues, around environmental issues. And I think the network has really taken the organization of LGBTQ issues to a higher level. And that's what we needed to do. Before the network, though, there was a group called Marriage Equality that really strove to make sure that LGBTQ folks had the same rights and responsibilities for equal marriage. And Tony Cabral and Mark Montigny were our only two elected representatives in the entire SouthCoast who supported marriage equality from the get-go because they understood what it meant to be equal in our community. By the time the Marriage Equality Coalition worked not just with LGBTQ folk, but with the entire community, many straight people were in the leadership of our movement as well. That made a huge difference for people understanding what it means to have marriage equality within our state. And we were the first state in this country to make it happen. And I think that's something that we can all be really proud of because all of us supported that. Even if we weren't on the front lines doing it, a lot of the organizations throughout our community supported marriage equality and made that happen. And all of our state reps and senators, except for one from Fall River and one from Wareham, did not support marriage equality when it came down to the vote, not to establish marriages only between a man and a woman in our state constitution. So activism takes many levels. That's what the bottom line is, right? On the personal level, on the political level, on the level of really engaging with people and using your skills to make a difference. And all of us have done that, I think, in many different ways in our lives, and all of us are going to continue to do it, I hope, as we continue to enjoy, the wonderful community that we live in. We're very lucky that we have such a very diverse, healthy community that we can be proud of. and welcome newcomers as they come in, whomever they are, because we were all newcomers except for the Native American Wampanoag people who lived here long before us. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Anything else you want to do for me? She's been doing for me since I broke my leg. Oh, she's been doing for me since I met her. So I am 74 this summer. I just have to get that out of the way because if I say it enough, I'll believe it, but it's hard to believe. In any case, I grew up just up the hill from you in Blue Meadows Housing Project. And went to New Bedford High School. And the first story I'd just like to tell you quickly is I was a sophomore, and I had a paper to do for school, and I went into the library. Those of you here, everybody remembers card catalogs, right? When I talk to kids, they don't know what I'm talking about. So I went to the card catalog that I was looking for, and then I noticed that I was right in the section of the H drawer. So I looked around and nobody was near me, and I opened the H drawer and I looked up homosexuality. And the card said, C, S-E-E, deviant behavior. So I thought, shit, I'm not a deviant. Shut the drawer, went home, grew up, graduated high school and college, got married, had 2 kids, adopted them, and just was sort of living my life. There was a piece missing. Then I met Liz. She was doing Salvadoran work, and my son was from El Salvador, and we fell in love. Problem was, of course, that my whole adult life was geared upon getting out of Greater New Bedford. She just told you that she loved New Bedford and wanted to live here for the rest of her life. So that we got over that. We travel a bit, and even if it's just a Fall River, and it satisfies me. But the difference between my reading that in the card catalog and what is available to young people who are thinking or feeling that they are GLBTQ plus is just a lifetime difference. It's not like they live on the same planet anymore, which is wonderful for them. The problem, of course, is that there are a lot of adults in the country who don't think it's a good idea that they should think that this is good. And the pushback has been just phenomenally awful in many, many states. But it doesn't have to be. And these kinds of events, you go home and tell people that you heard a couple of people speaking, and gee, you know, they were kind of ordinary. And they had some funny stories or touching stories to tell, will help. But there are still so many LGBTQ kids who are homeless. I'm a social worker by profession. I worked with some of them in this area when I worked at DSS. There are still so many barriers. There are still so many kids who get thrown out of their homes, who are afraid to tell their parents that they're gay. And they don't live in places that have resources for them, like we actually have here in New Bedford, which I'm amazed at and very proud of as well, because we've come a long way from the card catalog. That's for sure. So it is, I think, important for all of us who made it through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s around here to really help in whatever way we can to give the GLBTQ kids in this area an opportunity to have a good adolescence, to feel good about the area in which they live, and to maybe, stay here or come back and contribute to our community. because the longer I live, the better I feel about living in New Bedford. It really is a great place. So that's my story. Here I am still. Thank you for coming.
So thank you all for your stories. So now it's the time that we come up. Bruce, we're gonna, yeah, stay and grab a microphone. Thanks. Well, that was fun. Well, fun and also real. So it was so great to hear you all tell your stories. I'm really struck by, you brought up privilege, right? And I grew up in Connecticut. And I didn't see a lot of difficulties in my life growing up, although I did grow up at a time when busing came around. And so, there was, for me, it's been going on for a long time, people treating other people like they don't exist or like change is needed. So anyway, enough of me blathering on. I'd like to invite you all to, and I think Beatrice may have a microphone, if anybody has any questions for the panel, to go ahead and raise a hand.
No one has questions? Oh, here we go, Gil.
Thanks, Gil. One second. The microphone's right behind you. You can go next. Okay. Or you can go first.
I should go first?
Sure.
Okay.
The person with the microphone goes first. Is it? Yeah.
Okay. I guess this question could be for Bev and Liz or Andy. One thing that elder LGBTQ have been experiencing is having to leave home at some point in time and go to assisted living or nursing home. And one thing that they encounter when they get there is the fact that they may have to go back into the closet. And I was just wondering, the reason for that is because of the way staff treat them in these environments, or they're just, insecure about being themselves in those environments. Do you know of any way to deal with that kind of a situation, and how we can move forward, helping those elderly make the transition?
Sure. What we do need here, and some group needs to maybe organize it, is some training required. Actually, it would be nice if the state mandated it for nursing homes and any of those assisted living programs, that there's mandated training for staff to recognize that some of the people that are in their facility are, not everyone is straight, that they're gay. They may have a partner who lives outside, they may have had a partner who died, but that their experiences need to be acknowledged just like the formerly married, divorced, widowed people who are living in these places as well. There are places, in Boston, there's 2 or 3 nursing homes that actually focus on GLBTQ elders. But I'll tell you a quick story. We had these 2 friends, John and George, and they were getting much older. They were living in Florida, and we went down to visit them, and George got sick, and the hospital said he had to move into a nursing home for a while. And so John and I got a list of names. We get to the first one, I park the car, and he doesn't get out. And I said, John, we got to go talk to him about George, find out about when he could, what the program's like and stuff. And he said, really scared. And this is a guy who was like a millionaire and didn't, have to bow down to anybody in his life. He says to me, "What if they find out that we're gay?" And I said to him, "Well, actually, it's the first thing I'm going to tell them." Because why waste our time? If they don't have a full positive response, we're back in the car. We go to the next place on the list, and we wait, we keep going until we find one that recognizes the value of your relationship. That's what we need to do. But I think that our generation will do that, as opposed to the generation before us, which spent a lot of time in the closet because they were physically afraid of for their lives.
Well, I can speak to it for the LGBT network. We work with 3 marginalized populations: trans, youth, and elders. So we have programs now for LGBT elders, and I do presentations both state and nationally regarding LGBT elders. And one of them I was doing for congregate living in the SouthCoast, and I was talking about LGBT elders. And one of the women gave a response that halfway through she didn't realize I wasn't talking about the staff, but the residents. She thought I was talking about the staff. Like, she didn't even have the conceptual idea that the residents could be LGBT. And especially the T, because not necessarily does the gender presentation match the gender genitalia, shall we say. We're all adults. So anyway, with the LGBT network, we have caseworkers that are working with individuals in congregate housing to be ombudsman positions where they're protecting them. We're working with technological challenges, we're working with socialization, we're working with intergenerational pieces. It's really exciting, and I am thrilled that we're doing it because these folks have been through a lot, and they're scared, and I don't blame them.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the question.
So Bruce, when you had the door slammed shut on you at New Bedford High, you could have gone in any number of directions, but you chose to go in a very constructive direction. What was the catalyst? What was the thought process? How did that all happen?
I had every intention of finishing high school. Give you the backstory on why I quit. I was in ROTC at the time, and I never took things too seriously, and so I wasn't very disciplined in ROTC. And so I was having fun, but I was getting in trouble. And I had heard that if you got kicked out of ROTC, then you could not graduate on stage. And I didn't want to rob my mother of that. And so I had to come up with a plan, and that's why I decided to quit school. And I figured when I returned to school, instead of enrolling in ROTC, which I surely wouldn't have been able to, I would enroll in gym. And so that was my plan. So I had every intention of finishing high school, and so when this assistant principal told me I couldn't come back, it was a real shock to me, and I had to rethink my whole game plan. So.
Thank you.
So all of you have a deep history in New Bedford. How do you see the community has changed over 50 years or 20 years, 17 years?
Who wants to go first?
Oh, that would be me. I think he's a year older than I am, 2 weeks or something. I think it's changed immensely. I'm like a big cheerleader for New Bedford now. We have a lot of friends out of state and out of town, and we, tell them, we give them a list of where they come to visit us. We live in Mattapoisett now, and we say, you got to go to the Whaling Museum, you got to go look at the waterfront, and we have all these restaurants and everything else. It is amazing, and I think that that growth and that change came partly because of a change in attitude of what people, when I was in high school, most of the kids I went to high school with were like me. They wanted to get out of here. as quickly as we could, although my father said, I'm not filling out a financial aid form. There's a very nice school up the road, whatever the name of UMass Dartmouth was in 1967, and he said, and you can take the bus to college. I thought, oh, this is really nice. This is really nice. But in fact, he was right. I graduated with no student loans and went to BU School of Social Work and was able to afford it, so it worked. But it has changed. The influx of people moving in here, the additional multicultural composition we have with a lot of people from Latin America and other places, I think has really leveled the playing field for everyone. And I think the school system does a pretty good job. I know some teachers there, and it's not easy, but it's, I think that they're doing a good job as well. So, you know, I think this is a great place, and I always hate to tell Liz she's right, but she was right about New Bedford long before I was.
I think the catalyst for a lot of the change that has occurred in New Bedford is the many courageous activists that went before us. I know in the black community we had people like Mary Barrows, Jack Custodio, Manny Costa, people who were out there on the front lines pushing for change. And then the city government and the movers and shakers in the city became somewhat responsive to the urging that these people were pushing.
And knowing some of those giants that Bruce referred to really they were my mentors when I first came to New Bedford. Mary Barrows once said, we were working together at the Women's Center, and we had some teen mothers who were working with us, and she said, now don't be soft on them. You know, you need to be as real with them as you are with everybody else. You don't give anybody any slack. You have expectations, and they'll rise to meet it. And it was, okay, you got it. And I think because people were so open to sharing who they are and their strengths, they were able to reinforce in me and other people how important it was to stand for the values we all believe. And because we are such a multicultural community, I think that really honoring the fact that there are more similarities than differences among us all, which is what Alex Haley said to me when he was at UMass Dartmouth speaking, that in New Bedford, as long as you're an honest and good person, I think you will find many people to be close with and to work with and to struggle with. And I'll tell you, I learned more from Jack and Manny and Mary and the giants in our community to really enable me to be a better community organizer as well as a better person. So, we're lucky.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question. Other questions?
I personally want to thank you for sharing your beautiful, authentic stories and for being here today. This is the third of these sessions, and every story I've heard so far has been touching and moving, and I appreciate it. Thank you. We have come a long way, and New Bedford is probably one of the most diverse, most inclusive cities I've ever known, and I've lived in another country. But I think we still have a long way to go. If you could all answer one thing you would like to see us evolve to, what would that be?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part of the question.
If you could see us evolve into something better, we're great. But if you could see us evolve into something better, what would that be?
That's a big question. Would someone like to take a step?
I think what's really exciting is the new wind projects that are coming into New Bedford, and I'm hopeful that that brings economic opportunity to the entire community, not just one segment, but to the entire community. And I think that there's a lot, we find from the LGBT network fundraising, there's money coming in. We find that there's economic development potential, and there's job training and excitement. So I'm hopeful that that will keep our youth in the community. It will provide opportunities for employment and for advancement.
Well, I think if economic development is important, but only if everybody enjoys a share of that economic development. And one of the critical problems we have in New Bedford, which I think sometimes people underestimate, is the housing crisis that we have. Because without adequate housing, we're looking at continuous cycles of poverty, and it's usually ingrained in those communities of people that have historically experienced the poverty. And until all of the people of New Bedford benefit from whatever progress we make, nobody benefits.
So I'm putting all my money on the next generation, and the generation that's here now. You know, the young people who are starting businesses, the young people who are staying here, those who are coming back. You know, there's always, once a month in the Standard Times, there's some article about somebody opening a business. They left 10 years ago, they grew up here, and now they're back. And they recognize that this was a good place to grow up, but they can make it better. And I go back to my younger son, who's from El Salvador, and his last name is Bocelli, because that was my ex-husband's last name. So he goes for a new job at a restaurant as a chef, and they expect to see an Italian guy show up, and he's not. And I asked him one day, how do you explain this? And he says, oh, it's easy, Mom. He said, I just tell them, I was born in El Salvador, I was adopted, I have a brother who's adopted, he's Cape Verdean, I have a mother who's Portuguese, and I have a father who's Italian and a mother who's a lesbian. And I say to him, you don't say that I'm Portuguese? He said, no, you're a lesbian. So that's, and he's now in his, early 40s. Yeah, he doesn't want me to say that, though. But the idea is that the generation behind him now just thinks that none of this really matters. What matters are good schools, good jobs, good housing, and the ability to have a decent, happy life wherever they are. And I think we're building that in New Bedford. I really do. You know, every once in a while you take 3 steps forward and 1 step back. Sometimes it's the people that the New Bedford voters elect. I won't say any more about that. But most of the time they make good choices. And I really think that things are going to keep going forward. And kids are going to stay here and grow up and start businesses and get jobs and raise families.
And it all starts with having safe and decent housing. I go back to what Bruce was saying. Having worked, my first job in New Bedford was Get Action in New Bedford. It was GAIN, and that was trying to organize people to have affordable housing. We worked with people not just in housing developments to make sure that their tenants' rights were recognized, but also to make sure that parents were involved in really doing what needed to happen within the community to help build that kind of, excuse me, strength that many kids need and have. I think every young person needs somebody to be able to talk with, you know, whether it's one of their parents or their aunt or uncle or friend or mother of their friend or whoever. But if you don't have a safe, decent place to live, then you're not going to be able to learn very well when you go to school, and you're not going to be able to excel in the way that we all want our kids to. So I think that's really the critical issue facing New Bedford. And once the train is actually here and the continued gentrification grows, we all need to fight against that.
Hi, do you think there's racial equality in New Bedford, in the schools and jobs?
Of course not. I think that there's lots of inequality in every aspect of life in New Bedford. We're not a perfect city. Day in and day out, we see instances, evidence that there's inequality. Look at housing, look at education, look at healthcare. Just look down the line and you'll see it.
I think since I've come to New Bedford back in 1978, I've seen movement forward, but not enough. What has to happen is, the educational system definitely has improved. There's fewer numbers of young people who are dropping out of school. When I first came here, it was an extremely high percentage of young people who were not finishing high school. And that limits your opportunity, clear and simple. So I think that's improved considerably. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of racial equality. There's a lot of profiling that still goes on, despite the fact that there are diverse police officers on the New Bedford Police Force. But we see all kinds of injustices happening based not just on the color of your skin, but what language you're speaking.
The only thing I want to ask Mike a question, but first of all, I just want to talk about the next generation. I think what's important for the next generation is for all of us, I'm a big advocate of mentoring. Mentoring the people that are behind us so they can learn and know the right things to do. So I think that's very important. Mike, I just wanted to ask a question about the project. I know you're going to take stories until August.
That's right.
But after that, or even before that, do people hear the stories by getting on the website? And I know Beatrice had said you go to YouTube. Is that how we get individual stories?
Through our website you can go to, and there'll be a link to, there's a project-based website.
Okay.
I'm going to throw a URL out. It's www.commonground.whalingmuseum.org.
Oh, it
and
is.
so they'll,
Okay.
I'm sorry, but if you go to our website, there'll always be a reference to get you there.
Okay, all right.
And those will be up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Really, it's been a privilege to hear your stories. And thank you all for coming. And I would say...
Thank you.